My name is Enrico Levi. I'm the founder and CEO of Insecto. Today, I'm very excited to share with you all our findings and participate to the launch of the HydroTrail, our product addressing the issue of structured defense from termites. Thank you, everybody, for being here. This is the bottle that you will see several times in the presentation. I'm here with Professor Phil Keller. He needs no presentation. His reputation precedes him as one of the leading entomologists in the country. The history of leading technologies for termites and the fact that the two phenoxyethanol is capable of mimicking the hormone trail, the pheromones that leads termites, is quite old, goes back some of the initial studies of the 50s and more in the 90s. What we were able to do was to transform something that was working in the lab and was something limited to the academia into a product that can revolutionize, we think, the way structures are protected for termite. We believe that the HydroTrail that combines with existing forms of protection with the station can become the new golden standard in terms of structural protection. So I think that just pass the presentation to Dr. Keller, that is more capable than me to explain how we got to this point. Thanks again for being here. As I said before, to those that joined earlier, this session is recorded. It will be available on YouTube and other platforms, including our website. And we have in this model the possibility of asking questions. We will have a more formal Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Phil, the audience is yours.
Thank you very much, Enrico. It's great to be here with you this afternoon. Some of you may know me, and I've been a professor at the University of Florida for this year. It's 50 years, and I retired about 5 years ago. So basically, I am an emeritus professor, retired, but I still come into work every day to try to work with students and deal with some of the research projects that we have going with them. I wanted to talk with you today about HydroTrail and really the science behind HydroTrail. And some of the things that we've discovered about HydroTrail are that we have the potential for better structural termite protection with this particular technology. We've seen faster and more hits on stations, which we feel translates into better structural protection. It's a green product and is not considered an insecticide. Back when we first started with this, with the concept, we approached the Department of Agriculture in Florida to say, can we sell this product? We don't think it's an insecticide, so it doesn't need registration. And they said, well, we don't do that anymore. EPA does that. So we actually submitted the information to EPA for a determination on whether it was an insecticide. And it turns out they had this was a new program that they had that I don't think anyone had gone through it before. And they went ahead and determined it was not an insecticide that was regulated by FIFRA. And they needed to have their attorneys write the letter appropriately. And it took forever for the attorneys to be able to figure out how to write that letter. But we finally got it. And we now can say that it is not an insecticide regulated by FIFRA, which is the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act for the United States. It is effective. It is a product that is effective against subterranean termites. For instance, the Eastern Subterranean termite and other members of the genus Reticulotermes, and the Formosan and Asian subterranean termites, which are in the genus Coptotermes. And it probably is active against other termite species as well. And as I've said, it's not an insecticide and it's not regulated by FIFRA, which allows its sale to be appropriate in the United States. It's an eco-friendly product that's biodegradable in soil. And actually the active ingredient breaks down to chemicals that we have in our own bodies that are waste products from the citric acid cycle, which is how we get energy within our bodies. It's a simple application, requires no digging, and it's an easy spray application that's made to the soil surface. And about 3 to 4 gallons of 2% solution treat an average size house. So for instance, that is an application that's being applied in New Orleans by a technician there. And it's a D-liner sprayer that is designed to apply lines to athletic fields for football games or even baseball games. And we've done the calculations and figured that about 3 to 4 gallons of 2% solution will treat an average size house, and it can be applied with a backpack or a wheeled sprayer. So there's nothing really new that the industry needs to buy in order to do the application. And we have data to show that the product will last at least 90 days. Now, just so you have an idea about how HydroTrail works, HydroTrail uses termite foraging and trail following behavior to be able to increase control efforts. So how do termites forage for food? Well, basically, the initial way that they forage for food is fractal foraging. Fractals are a systematic search pattern using branch tunnels to explore for food. And that's similar to a snowflake. I have a snowflake imaged here, and you can see there's a main tunnel that comes out from in all directions from where the colony would be located, with branch tunnels that come out in all directions. This kind of pattern is something that eliminates repeat searches in the same area. And those termite tunnels evenly divide up their search area to be able to efficiently find food. Now, if we take a look at an actual termite foraging pattern, you can see that it's very similar to that snowflake pattern. And this was work done in Dr. Nanyao Su's lab down in Fort Lauderdale. And you can see that in this particular case, there's a tunnel going straight out, and there's a branch tunnel coming off of it. So that would be a main tunnel, that would be a branch tunnel, and you have that repeated. Usually those branch tunnels have an angle of about 80 degrees, so that they're able to efficiently search for food in the area. So those exploratory tunnels expand out in that starburst pattern from that central point. And that search is not random. There are many people that say termites search randomly for a food source. Well, they don't. That search is not random. It's a pattern that's dictated by physics. Now, one thing that isn't usually told is that termites don't only use fractal foraging to explore for food. They do edge foraging, which is kind of pictured here on the right, where they're trailing along the edge of objects. They'll trail along sidewalks, they'll trail along driveways or foundations into buildings. And I think that one of the most common ways that they get into structures are along tree roots and cables and pipes that lead straight to the building. And in that particular case, with edge following, they're not doing that fractal foraging, they're doing edge following these edges underground that lead them directly to a food source. And it's a lot more efficient for termites to follow the edge of something underground than it is for them to tunnel completely through soil. So these paths that they create can lead directly to a building and to the structural root wood to be able to feed on it. So what happens once termites find food is that they change their behaviors from that fractal foraging or edge foraging, and that changes to feeding and recruiting behavior. Trail pheromones are then deposited in the tunnels, and more termites then follow these pheromone trails that are laid down, and then when they're returning from the food, they're laying down more trail in order to recruit more termites. And eventually a permanent working tunnel is constructed. And that's pictured here on the right, where you can see that loads of termites are coming out of that main foraging tunnel because they found a food source and have been feeding on it for some time. So these large numbers of termites then can attack the wood and destroy it in structures. Now, I had a need that actually resulted in the HydroTrail patent uh, uh, for the product that's being debuted. And it started with me wanting to buy a condo for my son. He was a freshman at the University of Florida back then, and he actually went on to get all 3 degrees: his bachelor's, master's, and PhD in electrical engineering. And we wanted him to be out of the house and not try to live on his own. So we were looking at condos to buy, and we selected a condo that was in a complex that was really close to food on campus. So we were really happy that he would be able to not have to rely on his own cooking in order to live, but be able to get on the food plan with the university. And that condo, I was concerned about maybe it having termites, and had been treated with a termite bait system for more than 5 years. And at the time, I was working with termite detecting canines and was able to get 2 of those dogs into the structure to inspect it for termites. And those canines found right around the sliding glass doors a live infestation of termites. And actually, the first dog hit on it, the second dog hit on it, and finally, we tore the wood open and found live termites crawling in the wood trim within the building. We investigated the bait placements to see if they were appropriately placed, and they were perfect. They were spread out 10 to 20 feet apart all the way around the building, had been there for 5 years. And I asked the bait manufacturer to come out and see if everything was okay. And they said, well, they'll check the paperwork and see whether they've been serviced. And they checked the paperwork and they said everything was correct in the files and all the stations were correctly placed. So at the end of this whole process, the representative said, well, actually, I talked to the representative and I said, what do you do in a case like this? And they said, move the stations until you find the termites. And that got me interested in this whole thing because I said, wouldn't it be better to lead the termites to the stations? So basically, HydroTrail is now the only proven termite guiding technology. And it works on the principle that you don't move the station to the termites. You actually move the termites to stations in order to improve the structural protection. So basically, I would be unhappy if I had to move the station to find the termites, which was what was told to me at the time. I now can be happy because I have the ability to move the termites to the stations. Now, termites can tunnel between stations to get to the house. So for instance, if there's a pipe underground, or if there are roots from a tree that are going towards the house, the termites may just follow those and never hit the stations. And then what you end up with is a termiticide failure. And as a matter of fact, I was at a meeting and did a poll analysis of the people that were there, and I said, can termites tunnel between stations to get to a building? And 93% of the pest management professionals in the room said that termites could tunnel between the stations to get to the building. So the question is, how can you prevent termites from going between those termite stations? And basically, it can be by using something like HydroTrail to connect the stations and build a protective zone around the house by connecting the termite stations with HydroTrail. So basically the yellow lines here would be where HydroTrail would be applied to the soil surface, and that would give you a protective zone around the entire building. So the way that it works is that HydroTrail directs the termites that are going along maybe a route or something else. It directs them to the stations as opposed to ending up going directly to the house. And just to give you a little bit of an idea about the directions on how to use HydroTrail or how to apply HydroTrail, there is no need to dig a trench. You pour 80 mils of HydroTrail per gallon of water into a backpack, or maybe a cart type sprayer that you can pull along that I showed you, that cart type sprayer that was in New Orleans. And one thing that's very interesting is that even though the active ingredient in HydroTrail looks exactly like water, and it's a little bit heavier than water, and it takes a while for it to dissolve in water. So it goes, if you pour it into a container, it looks like it's mixed thoroughly, but it's actually sitting on the bottom. So you really should agitate the sprayer thoroughly for at least 1 minute prior to application. If you don't do that, you may end up burning vegetation that's along the ground. You then can apply that diluted product at the rate of 1 gallon per 50 feet in a 2 to 4 inch wide band to connect the termite stations, and if necessary, apply water to move the product from vegetation to the soil. So the idea is to get it into the soil, and it will move eventually down to where the termites are. Now, taking a look at a couple of publications on where termites are in the soil, you can see that the first 2 inches of soil, there are almost no termites. When you go down 2 to 5 inches, you have most of the termite tunneling, and most of the termite bait stations that are manufactured are utilizing that behavior in order to get termites into the bait stations. They have their openings down in that zone where termites are doing most of their tunneling. You go down further, which is 5 inches to about 4 feet, and there are a few termites. You go below 4 feet, there are usually no termites found. So that's from the research. And what we suggest doing is applying the HydroTrail application over the soil surface. And then because of the movement of water over time, it will go down to the termite tunneling zone and influence the termites to tunnel where you want them to go. So the big question that is usually asked is, what is HydroTrail? And basically it contains a glycol, which is 2-phenoxyethanol. And most of the time I'll refer to it as 2-PE, so I don't have to stumble over the long chemical name. And there are 2 properties of glycols that are important for moving termites to where you want them to go. First of all, glycols are water absorbent. So they will pull moisture out of surrounding soil. They will pull moisture from the air and aggregate it where the product is applied. Also, it's an artificial trail pheromone, and you might call it a trail pheromone mimic, but I like calling it an artificial trail pheromone because it is not the trail pheromone of termites. Termites use dodecatrienol, which is not at all related to this. It's a very difficult product to manufacture, but 2-phenoxyethanol is something that is readily available and used in a wide variety of products. Do you realize that it's in many consumer products? It was first discovered in, I think it was 1958, that they would follow pen ink, and no one knew what the chemical was until the mid to the late 1990s, when Greg Henderson at LSU took pen ink and actually was able to determine what chemical caused the trailing, which is 2-PE. And you can see over here on the right-hand side, the termites are following that pen ink trail religiously in a circle around UF. And you notice that they are going where I want them to, because that trail is not the color of the pen ink, but the 2PE that is used as a solvent in pen ink to give that, to be able to, for you to be able to draw on the paper. And another thing that's interesting about the about 2PE is that it's found in cosmetics. People actually put cosmetics on their skin, rub it on their skin, and use it in their daily lives. It's also found in eye drops at a higher concentration than what is in the pen ink to cause that trailing. And so basically, eye drops have that chemical. You drop 2PE in your eyes. And it's even found in foods, and 2PE is found in foods. Because of its wide use in consumer products, it's been evaluated extensively and is found to be safe and ecologically sound chemical. It has been published on its safety by NIOSH, the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, in 1991. And also EPA has looked into it in 2019. So basically the conclusions are that it is a chemical that can be used in a wide variety of products. Now, I wanted to start out and tell you a little bit about some of our research with 2PE, and it actually started out with a graduate student, Luke Prescott, who did his master's thesis and finished it up in 2021. And when he completed his thesis, he became an officer in the US Navy, and he became a Navy entomologist. And this is a picture of him in his Navy uniform, ready to do some backpack mist blowing operations for mosquitoes. But he did his work on termites in our lab, and he asked several questions. Do other glycols closely related to 2PE cause termite trail following? In other words, is this something that is unique to this particular chemical, or are there a bunch of chemicals that could cause the trail following that I showed you? He also asked the question, do termites follow 2PE dried onto vinyl tile? Vinyl tile is a surface that is somewhat permeable to chemicals. So even though it seems like most of the chemicals stay on the surface, there are some that get in. We know that from cockroach research. And he also asked the questions, do termites follow 2PE applied to soil? Well, they actually do that trailing in soil as opposed to on a paper surface. And then he followed it up with field studies in Ocala, and also there was an independent study that was done in Jacksonville that I'll report on. And these were asking the questions, do soil surface 2PE applications penetrate to where termites are found? And will 2PE applications provide better and faster hits on stations? So we've tried to ask all of the questions about how this could be how this chemical could be transformed into a protective product for houses. Now, the termites that were used in the HydroTrail lab studies were Eastern Subterranean termites, Reticulotermes flavipes, nothing outstanding. A termite that is native to Eastern North America. He used 4 colony fragments maintained in plastic containers, and you can see those containers on the right-hand side. Every once in a while, we get an escape and get termite tubes going up the wall, but we're now using clamps to be able to keep them in better. And those cardboard sheets were kept in the urban entomology lab at the University of Florida before I retired. And then the 4 colony fragments came from 4 different locations: the solar park at the University of Florida, the extension office in Jacksonville, High Springs, and even Dr. Baldwin's private property in Gainesville, Florida. And the termites were collected from these containers with an aspirator tube to be able to put into experiments. The first experiment that I want to tell you about is comparing 2PE and 5 other glycols that would be applied to paper. So we had a release site where 10 termites would be added. We had an opening in that so that they would exit the release site, and then a glycol line drawn down the piece of paper to the end. And so that was basically 20 centimeters long, 18 centimeters outside the release site and 2 centimeters inside the release site. And what we could measure with this then is the number of termites that would complete the entire trail, how long it took them to complete the entire trail, and then the trailing distance that they followed. The chemicals that we used are glycol ethers, and it was 2-PE, which I told you about, and then these other closely related compounds. I was hypothesizing that it was this part of the molecule on 2-PE that was causing the trail following. So if you look at these all had this OH on the end of each one of these molecules, and I was hoping that all of these chemicals would get termites to follow them. And we use solvents like water and ethanol to apply these treatments to the paper. And what we saw was this, that the water treatments had no trail following, that we had no termites completing the trail when we applied water. And we had significantly more trailing for each one of those glycols, but it was nothing compared to 2-PE. 2-PE was significantly the best chemical for termites to follow the trail. And we found that 85% of the termites that we released into these release chambers, that they would follow the 2-PE trail, where very few of them followed any of these other glycols. So basically, this is a unique chemical and a unique response of the termites to 2-PE. We also measured the distance that the termites followed, and we found that that for the water treatment, they would go a little distance, like 2 centimeters, and 6 centimeter up to 6 centimeters for some of the other glycols. But termites followed the 2-PE the greatest distance, and 19 out of 20 of these setups, we had them following the entire distance with 2-PE. So this is also a unique response for termites to a chemical. And then the time it takes the termites to complete the trail, of course, the lower the number, the better, except for the control. None of the controls completed the line, but it took the termites about a little less than 40 seconds to complete the trail for 2-PE, and it took them a lot longer, probably about 3 times longer, to complete the trail for all of these other glycols that are very closely related. And what we concluded with this is that termites completed the 2-PE line significantly faster than any other chemical that was in the test. We then followed that up with 2-PE lines applied to a circular vinyl tile. And basically, these red lines here, not the circle around the perimeter, but the red lines here are the way that the termites would build their tubes over the vinyl tile. We had termites in the soil underneath the circle of vinyl tile, and then they would come up onto the surface of the tile to forage for food. And what we found is that when they were going to the wood, they would follow the red lines very well. And basically, we had 20 controls, 20 treated, 4 colonies, 40 repetitions per colony. It was an insane number of repetitions that were done. And if we take a look at the 4 different colonies, the termites from all 4 colonies really were religious in following the red line. And the return line, when they would build a tube to go back to the soil, did not as readily follow the 2-PE line. So basically 90% of the termite tubes followed the 2PE lines to the wood when they were foraging for wood. And then if we look at the average distance of the shelter tubes from the 2PE lines, they were closer than the untreated controls. And basically, this was an interesting study because the termite tube stayed within 4 to 5 millimeters of the 2PE lines on the vinyl tile. Then this one was rather earth-shattering because we decided to apply the 2PE to around the perimeter of a piece of filter paper. So there were 2 filter paper discs put in what we call nunk dishes, which are 9-inch by 9-inch square pieces of plastic. We put sand in them, so about a ½ inch of sand, so termites would be able to tunnel to the food. And if you notice, they're released down here in the center. They have the option of going to a water-treated control or a treatment. There's nothing for them to follow. It's just whether the treatment is surrounding that. It was applied to the soil around the filter paper, not to the filter paper itself. And then we could measure whether the termites went to the food surrounded by the 2PE soil or not. And if you notice, 90% of the termite tunnels went to the food with 2PE soil, where the soil was treated around the filter paper with 2PE, and that would be this red circle here, as opposed to the water. And we saw this 90% of the time when we did the reps. And what I find interesting, if we take a look at this particular image, is that the termites go out from the release site and they do fractal foraging until they detect the HydroTrail treatment up here by the filter paper. And that's somewhere around 3 to 4 inches away from the filter paper. They're actually detecting the 2PE treated soil. So then we got a little bit fancier, and that is, do termites follow a 2PE treated line in soil? And so take a pipette and draw a line in the soil and apply it to the soil surface and see whether the termites follow that line or not. And there's a cardboard square that is there for food. The release site is down in the opposite corner, and then we could measure the termite tunnel distance from the 2PE line. And basically, you can see it on the right-hand side. The termites follow that 2PE line, just like ants follow their pheromone trails to food. Termites, they'll go to the left a little bit, then correct. They'll go to the left again a little bit and correct. Maybe they go to the right and correct. But basically, they stay within 6 millimeters of the 2PE lines that we drew in the soil. It was amazing to see this because it hadn't been done before. So basically, with our overall laboratory results, the 2PE treatment on paper, if we go ahead and recap this, more than 80% of the termites completed the 2PE line. Termites followed the 2PE line all the way from the release site to the end of the paper in 19 out of 20, the greatest distance, and they completed that 2PE line the fastest. So they completed the line, they went the greatest distance, and they did it the fastest. When we put it on vinyl tile, more than 90% of the termite tubes followed the 2PE lines, and they stayed within 4 to 5 millimeters of the treated lines. When we surrounded food, which was filter paper with 2PE treated soil, 90% of the termite tunnels went to the food surrounded by the 2PE soil. And then a 2PE line drawn in the soil, the termites followed these lines in the soil and they stayed within 6 millimeters of the line. You can see that treatment line going straight and the termite tunneling going serpentine along it. Similar to what ants do when they're following a pheromone trail. So then we go to field trials. These field trials were done in Ocala, Florida, and the termites in the ground at the time were Formosan subterranean termites. And when we go to do field studies, we know that often promising lab results fail in the field. And I was concerned that all of the work that we had done in the lab really wouldn't pan out to be anything that would work in the field. We went out into a pasture where there were Formosan termites swarming every year, and we put out 20 pop-up stations, and we alternated 2PE treatment with water treatment. The blue is water treatment. The orange or yellow is 2PE treatment. And so every other station had a 2PE treatment. And the treatment was applied as 1.2 meters, which is about 4 feet. And we had 4 bands of 4 feet going out perpendicular to each other. And we had a control and a treatment for the different locations that were alternated in the pasture. And I had my idea is that these promising lab results will fail in the field. Well, it was rather interesting that only the 2PE treated stations had active termites in them. None of the water treatments had any active termite infestations. Now, when I look at this aerial view of what we did, you can see that the stations closest to the trees were the ones that were getting active termites, whereas the other stations that were located further from the trees, you have this larger gap here to the stations, those did not get any termites in them. So if we take a look at the timing of when we did this, the treatments were put on in February, and through March, there was no activity. Through February, there was no activity. Through April, there was no activity. And in May, we started getting activity. And you can see that May it started, June there was more, and then it kind of tapered off after that into July. And in the end, what we had was 50% of the 2PE stations were hit by termites, and for water, there were no hits at all. It was absolutely phenomenal to see results like this, and this was with Formosan termites in Ocala. We then went to do a HydroTrail tree study, and this was funded by Insecto, so we can now call 2PE HydroTrail. And it was conducted by Claude Thomas and Jennifer Leggett, and they own Lindsay Pest Control, and they did the work that was funded by Insecto to see whether you could take a tree that was actually out in a cemetery and then treat the area around the tree, similar to what we had done in the pasture down in Ocala. And there were 10 HydroTrail treated trees, 10 untreated trees. There were 4 traps per station. And so we had 40 traps that were treated, 40 traps that were untreated in this particular study. And if we take a look at what happened, at 1 month, there were 4 hits with HydroTrail treatments that represents about 10%. That represents 10% of the stations that we had out there. There were no hits with any of the water treatments at 1 month. At 2 months, 15% of the stations were hit, which means that there were 6 stations that were positive, as opposed to 2 for the water treatments, which is 5% hits. And at 3 months, 25% of the stations were hit, which represents 10 of the stations out of 40 were hit. as opposed to the water treatments where 10% were hit, which is 4 stations were hit. So if we look here, 0, 2, and 4, going from 1 month, 2 months to 3 months for water, as opposed to 4, 6, and 10. A tremendous difference between those different, between the treatments with water and the treatments with HydroTrail. And what we conclude with this is there's faster detection of termites and more hits on the termite traps because of the application of HydroTrail. So if we take a look at what we conclude from those field trials, the soil surface treatments with HydroTrail and 2-PE were effective, and that they actually were able to permeate down to the termite tunneling zone, which is 2 to 5 inches in the soil, and modify the behavior of termites, even though we're applying it to the soil surface. Both native and Formosan termites followed these HydroTrail lines or 2-PE lines to treated stations. And we had faster detection with HydroTrail in both studies. The termites began hitting HydroTrail stations at 1 to 3 months after treatment, and no control stations were hit at 1 month for both particular studies. And we had more hits with HydroTrail or 2-PE with both studies. Formosan termites, only the HydroTrail stations were hit with a 50% hit rate at 3 to 5 months after treatment. And for Formosan and native termites at 3 months in the Jacksonville study, we had a 25% hit rate for HydroTrail and only a 10% hit rate for the water control. So then Insecto went to set up an innovation council, which is composed of forward-thinking pest management professionals in some different parts of the country to be able to do the work. Now, I can't tell you who the Innovation Council is because of non-disclosure agreements that were signed between Insecto and the cooperators. And these were early adopters that were provided HydroTrail and were advised by Insecto. They came up with dilution rates that they felt were for easy application. They came up with the equipment that's needed for application. They confirmed faster detection and more hits from that was similar to what we saw in our research plots. And they were able to confirm that connecting the stations actually works. And the expected treatment time for these treatments was 15 to 20 minutes total. And that breaks down from being 3 to 5 minutes for measuring the product out and then measuring the treatment distance, and then mixing up the product in the sprayer and agitating it, and then the application of 5 to 7 minutes. So a total time of 15 to 20 minutes that it would take to do the application. Now, as far as thinking about how to integrate HydroTrail into a typical service, you might use it for monitoring to find termites before there is structural damage or to locate areas of termite activity. You might also use it for prevention by leading termites to stations and providing additional structural protection. And it could also be used for treatment to move termites from infested wood to stations and even potentially reduce liability for insurance claims for termite failures. So this can be a concept of preventing treatment failures. And of course, the end result is that the industry should be able to profit from HydroTrail. And I have some ideas on that. I'm not an expert on how to make money with the pest control industry, but I can tell you about the new technologies that come along. But if you're going to improve your baiting, you should improve your customer retention, and imagine that going from 90 to 95% customer retention. And I know that getting a new customer is one of the most expensive things that you do in the business. And so losing a customer means that you have to replace it. And if you can get customer retention up to 95%, you're really doing good. HydroTrail should be available at a really low cost, but great returns because of the protection that it provides. It's a really green approach to termite protection, and as you can see that the chemical 2-PE, 2-phenoxyethanol, is something that's used in many consumer products, even in the food that you eat, the cosmetics that are put on people's skins, and even eye drops. And you have a marketing and commercial advantage over your competitors because you're providing enhanced service for your customers. And when I think about it, I have termite baits installed around a house that I own. And every year I get a report from the company saying that there's no activity. And guess what? If I get activity, I know that the treatments are doing something. If I don't have activity, in my mind as a consumer, I'm not getting very much for my money. And of course, 2-PE HydroTrail will increase the number of the number and speed of hits to stations. And of course, it can reduce the cost and time of treating callbacks. And there's nothing that technicians hate worse than having to go back and try to treat for a failure where termites have gotten into an infested building. So let me give you a few take-home points, and these are 10 things that we discovered about HydroTrail. First of all, HydroTrail has the ability to guide termites to stations. Second, it is not an insecticide. It's really a green approach, and there's nothing like it available on the market anywhere. 2-PE, which is the active ingredient in HydroTrail, is a biodegradable compound. It's commonly present in cosmetic products, eye drops, and pen ink. So it has an incredible safety record. It makes structural protection better. It can be applied to the soil surface to connect stations that are applied 10 to 20 feet apart around houses. It does not require digging a trench, so it's very easy to apply. It can be applied with typical pest control equipment like a backpack sprayer or a wheeled cart sprayer, so that you can do those applications easily and efficiently. It requires no PPE once it's diluted. You should use gloves before it is diluted. And it comes in 1 liter bottles that can treat 2 to 3 average size houses. And it's the first completely new termite management technology in 30 years. So I'm really excited about something that started out as a student project and has turned into a product that can be useful for termite control. And basically, we are seeing better structural termite protection using HydroTrail to build a protective zone around the house by connecting termite stations. And with that, I don't know if you have any questions, but if you're wondering about the availability of HydroTrail, it will be available in the US by March. And it
actually, the first shipment arrives end of next week. So yes, it will be very early.
And if you're interested in finding out more, contact Randy Lastly at Insecto. Her email is below. So anyway, thank you very much for listening to me. I wanted to go through the science that we have behind this because it is quite extensive, and it's important for you to be able to see the actual numbers and the way that things were done.
Phil, I was texting with Randy, and there is a lot of questions that have been
Yeah,
asked.
we've got a lot in the Q&A, so I just want to kind of try to go through some of these as quickly as we can, because we've got several. I just threw them all in the answered, but we're going to get to them. There was a bunch of questions about the equipment. and the types of termites targeted, but the equipment, I think Phil covered that, you know, your backpack sprayers, you can use your existing ones, you just need to rinse them out, rinse out the pesticides before you add the HydroTrail. And then the Formosan and the subterranean termites are the termite species. But then I wanted to go down to some of these more specific questions. So if you had a pier and beam structure that has active infestation of subtermites and is to low for service under, could this product potentially draw out the activity to a termite station?
Okay, we haven't done that experiment, but from everything that we know about this product, the termites should follow the chemical trail to the stations from wherever they are. So I can't say definitively that it will draw termites out of a structure, but if they're there and there's no moisture source above ground, that means they're getting into the structure below ground, and we should be able to move them from their access points to the stations.
Okay. Next question from Shannon. Was testing performed on various bait stations or one particular brand?
The work that we did was with pop-up stations, not bait stations. So basically, we were putting the HydroTrail on the ground. The termites were hitting the stations, saying that there were active termites there, and then a pest control operator could come in and do a treatment later on, and so we weren't using any commercially available bait stations.
Not in our test, but the innovators council, member of the council, were instead using a variety of different stations. Our product worked with every stations that you can have on the market, so both monitoring and treatment.
So if you remember, the distance below ground that the station has openings for the termites to enter is critical, and every one that I'm familiar with has openings right in that 2 to 5 inch below the soil surface level, and so there isn't any reason to believe that there would be any problem with any of the bait products that are out there.
Okay, so the next question is about soil types and moisture conditions. How does the product perform in areas around structures where soil moisture varies due to environmental factors such as building shadows, creating both moist and arid zones?
Okay, well, we're going to rely on our innovators to be able to tell us that, but the idea is that you would want to put HydroTrail on the soil surface, and if it's on the vegetation, then you apply a little more irrigation to make sure it gets down to the soil surface, and then can move naturally down into the soil. Obviously, it's going to move faster if there's high soil moisture, and in one study that we did, we applied it to the ground, and then we had a flooding event where it flooded and the HydroTrail was basically washed away. So you don't want to put it in an area like a ditch that's going to hold water, but you want to be in an area around a structure where you would typically do baiting.
Okay, and so that kind of goes into the next question. Does this product dilute over time due to climate factors, raining, flooding, and is the lifespan shortened due to these potential factors?
Once it's in the soil, it's not going to be degraded by sunlight. It has an affinity for soil, so it isn't readily washed away. But if you have a flooding event, it will be. So what we've seen is a longevity of we're comfortable with 3 months as it being something that would work for termites over a 3-month period. And as you saw with the Ocala study, it actually went a little bit longer than that, but we'd prefer to be, I feel a lot more comfortable telling people that that product lasts about 3 months.
Okay, this question is from Glenn. These trials were conducted in sand. Has any work been completed in other soil types like clay?
Yes. Some of our innovators have used it in other soil types, and they're excited about getting it and being able to use it more extensively.
Okay, this is about attraction from other insects. will the pheromone only attract termites or other insects attracted to bait stations?
To my knowledge, no other insect has been shown to be attracted to phenoxyethanol. There's no other insect uses that as a trail following pheromone or something that attracts them. It's kind of a unique situation because most of the scientists don't even know what part of the molecule causes this response, because dodecatrienol doesn't even look like this compound. So it's interesting that it is a trail pheromone mimic, and it's not anywhere close in appearance to dodecatrienol.
This is about the test. So the station showing hits after 2 months and 4 months, taking into account the natural pheromone that is deposited by the termites organically. Because that's the question, is that taking into account the pheromone that's already there?
Okay, well, what typically happens is that they will follow the pheromone trail to a food source. Then if they find a food source, they will lay down a trail, and more termites will be recruited, and finally more. And what you saw in the Ocala study was, using the pop-up stations, they eat all the wood. And so the activity drops off because there's no wood left for them to consume. So basically, that whole process is starting with them following this trail and then laying down more to whatever the food source is that they've discovered as a result of following the trail.
Okay, this question's been answered or asked a couple different ways, but what about locations between stations that are blocked by a sidewalk or a driveway or some other physical barrier? Are we to spray across that area?
Okay, you don't spray it across the driveway or sidewalk. You would go right up to that particular area. And my experience is that most of the driveways, especially if they're like concrete or asphalt, they're so compacted underneath, the termites really aren't in that 2 to 5 inch band, but they will follow that driveway to the house. So you want to get this trail down right up to the next, right up next to the sidewalks and driveways that are going to the house. But you don't spray it on the driveway unless it's a dirt driveway. You possibly could.
Okay, and then what about mulch beds and rock beds around the home? Do you need to rake away those items to be able to apply the product?
I would say that mulch is something that's going to be absorbent, and that's not necessarily bad. It's going to keep it where you want it, but it probably would be better to make a little trench in that, especially if that is a house that has termite infestation already, to be able to treat the soil directly as opposed to the mulch itself. But I don't think the mulch is going to be a barrier to it being able to move down into the ground. As a matter of fact, because the mulch is maintaining a higher soil moisture, it's probably going to allow the product to move down into the ground faster.
Okay. Can HydroTrail be used as an attractant for a non-repellent termiticide, i.e. using mixed with fipronil?
That's not something that we've looked at. We've only looked at attracting them to stations. And I think in Australia, they were talking about trying to do that, actually mixing it in with the fipronil. But from the standpoint of legality in the United States, the idea is that you put HydroTrail down to get termite activity and then treat them.
Okay. Can it be used with any bait station such as Cetricon or Trelona? Also, the 90-day life, does that mean it needs to be reapplied every 90 days? And how effective would it be if applied annually?
Okay, it's of course effective for bringing termites to any of the commercially available bait stations. Now, if you want to maintain that protective zone around the house, it really should be applied every 3 months. But if you want to increase the activity, it depends on your goals, I guess, as a pest control company. If you want to increase the number of hits, you could apply it every 3 months throughout the year.
Have you tried it with above ground stations?
We have not tried it with above ground stations yet.
Does this product have any effect on cats? That might be a funny
I
one,
would
don't know.
definitely apply the non-diluted product to cats.
No, kidding.
Just kidding, of course.
And then, what quantities will the product come in? They'll come in cases of 6 bottles. I can answer that one.
Yes, they come in cases with the 6 bottles. And I also recommend you to contact Randy, because we have decided to have a special offering for the launch of the product. So the first case of 6 bottles will come with a specific new price. For
Okay.
price list, contact Randy.
And then there's still a few more questions about the chemistry. Can it be affected by the texture of the soil? I guess, like the efficacy of the solvent?
Well, obviously, the termites are going to have a hard time going through coarse soil, and they have a better time going through sand, an easier time tunneling through sand. But basically, if they're following a trail, it doesn't matter what the thing is, as long as they can pick up a particle of soil and move it. Some of you may be aware that there has been work on particle sizes that are so large that termites can't move them, and have spaces between them that are too small for termites to squeeze between. So I would not try to get termites to tunnel through something that they can't tunnel through. So there's a little bit of put it out where it can work, and don't put it out where it doesn't have any possibility of working.
The range of area where it would work is pretty large.
Yeah, that the typical soils that we have will allow termites to tunnel through them, and if termites can tunnel through it, HydroTrail can get to the point where the termites are in the soil.
And then I have another question about the studies, if it's been studied on ants.
I have not looked at it for ants, but nobody has ever said that ants, well, actually, we have tried to get ants to follow a pen trail, and they won't do it, where termites do.
Okay, and then there was a question on pricing. You guys can reach out to me directly, and then, hopefully we will have the product set up through the distributor network shortly, in March. So you could also go to your preferred distributor and inquire about pricing as well. I think we got most of the question. There is a question about what is the formulation? Just one formulation. I think he's meaning like, what's the mix? Maybe that's another question about the mixing.
The product is a solution, and basically undiluted is basically pure product, and so then it becomes a solution when you add it to water. But it's kind of like if you were going to get sugar to dissolve in water, you have to agitate it in order for it to dissolve. This is the same way. It takes a while for it to go into solution and get dissolved in water. So that agitation is very important for it to be put out correctly.
And then so would this potentially cause an increase of damage in the home? I think that's one of the common questions. Will it draw the termites to the home?
The way that we're perceiving it working is to connect the stations, so you will not draw termites to the house. You're drawing them to stations or
Okay.
a treatment zone.
And then the size of the bottle is 1 liter. And then the question is, how much in linear feet will that bottle treat?
Okay, it's about 450 linear feet that it will treat.
So we say 2 to 3
2
typical
to 3 average size
treatments.
houses, correct.
Yes. Does it mix slower in colder weather? The questions just keep coming, so keep going.
Well, I don't know if you've ever tried putting sugar into ice cold water, but it's a little bit harder. So I would assume that this would be the same thing, that you have to get it into solution, and that agitation does it. You can get sugar into cold water, but it takes a little more agitation to do it. And that would be the same with this product.
Okay. And then this is another question. Does it, you know, on the species that it targets, if you want to answer that a little bit more in detail, Bill?
Yeah, well, we've looked at it for Formosan subterranean termites and Eastern Subterranean termites, because those are the most common ones in our area. But there is documentation from other areas of the world where the trail pheromones of termites are pretty well the same for the different species. So I would expect that this would work the same for a wide variety of termites.
Okay, and then the water, the water used to dilute the product, are there any specifications on that? There's a question about drinking water, distilled water.
We just used water from the tap.
Okay. Okay. We could probably keep going on the questions, but I think we could wrap it up.
If there are more questions, please feel free to reach us. And again, as we said before, please contact Randy for pricing, shipping instruction, and all these questions related to the purchase of the HydroTrail.
And then whoever has, you know, everybody that's registered will get the link of the recording. So just be on the lookout for that once we have that downloadable and a live link that you can refer back to.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you all for attending.